Okay, so I've got some furniture loaded now the way I've been showing you to load components, and I've modelled these screens just using model in place the way I've been showing you as well. So make sure you can do both of those things, place a component and use model in place to make your own extrusions and other shapes that you need for your design. And then of course using, so I'll switch to a different view so it's clear, using basic walls and doors. You should easily be able to get the layout for your apartment designs. But then taking it a bit further, to get the lighting set up, one of the most important things you'll need for artificial lights is a ceiling. Okay, so I want to focus on getting ceilings into your projects, but because you haven't done lighting maybe for a little while, I just want to go over setting up a render with natural light or daylight before we go into putting a ceiling in. So a little bit to cover, but I'll try and do it quickly so you've got as much time as possible to do your work as well. So I'll start with a camera view, and I'll make a new camera view just to go over that one last time, or one more time. So here I'm going to the quick access toolbar to get to the camera tool, and I'm going to place it as close to this wall as I can without going over the wall. It's really important that you don't put your cameras inside walls. So just next to the wall there, and then I'm going to take it over to the left and try and keep it fairly straight so I get a nice neat view, or one that's got lots of straight lines. Okay, so by making it straight, it's almost like a one-point perspective, but it looks like we're looking very close up because of the way the field of view is set by default. And I'm sure you realise that you can drag these borders out. But maybe what isn't clear is that by doing that, you're expanding or extending this field of view. So, I think I mentioned this to you before, if you take it too far, let's bring this down at the bottom, it can make the view maybe look a bit distorted. So there the desk looks like it's stretched out because I've extended the field of view maybe a bit too far at the bottom there. So I'll bring that back, and then maybe we'll go left and right. You can probably get away with that. But your eyes will tell you when you've gone too far, usually, if you're paying attention to it.
Did you build this storage space with extrusion and all that?
They were families that have been loaded. But yeah, they could have been done with model in place, but anything that's repeated like that, think about using a separate family file because it makes it easier to manage. But it is made basically the same way as you would with model in place. Okay, so here you can see I've got a view that's okay. Maybe a couple of little tricks I can show you though. I do maybe want to bring it out further so that I can see the whole desk. So I'm going to use the walk tool there, and to bring this up in case you missed it, I've just clicked on the navigation wheel button over on the right, and then I'm going to click and hold the cursor down on, or hold the mouse button down on the walk tool there, and then notice how my cursor's gone down to the bottom of the screen, and if I move it down you'll see there's a little dot there. I'm just going a bit below that, and that's going to walk it back. And so now I can see the desk obviously, but notice how I can also see the window. So I'm basically looking through the window now. So no, that's right, it's not distorting it, that's right, because instead of expanding the field of view, which is like using a zoom lens on your camera, I'm moving the camera instead. So I'll use the pan tool and I'll bring it up and maybe get a view that is going to maybe emphasise this desk a bit more. Okay, so I'm happy with that. But then, of course, we're looking through the window, so I can see the window there, blocking my view. So a simple trick there, select the window, right click and hide it. Nothing wrong with that. So now I can render and get a view that shows a bit more than I had before. Okay, so now I want to get the sunlight to come through this this opening when I render. So you'll need to have true north set for this to work. So I'm going to save my file before I set the render up, and then I'm going to open up the. Also, I'm going to turn the shadows on first. You should have, yeah. Yep. So it's just asking if you want to have true north set all the time, and yes, you should have true north set. So here again, if I turn shadows on, you can see that I've actually got sunlight coming into the space already, and there's some over here, so it's not that bad, but maybe I want more sunlight on this coming over the desk. So I'm going to go to the sun icon and go to sun settings. And then notice how it's not actually using the north direction. This is the lighting setting, and there it just has two angles, which give us the angle for the sun, which is actually pretty good sometimes. So it's coming from the top right corner, basically. But I want to use the sun that I've set. So I'm going to go to still. And with this setting that I've got, let's see how that works. I'll click apply. It's really not too bad. But I want to get the sun, like I said, to come over the desk. So let's see if I can do that. I'll start with, let's say, winter solstice. And I'm going to click duplicate down the bottom. And I'll say this is winter morning. If I can remember which way north is, I think I can. I'm going to turn the ground plane off because that usually just gets in the way. And then I'll change the time to morning, 9 o'clock. Click apply. And, okay, so the sun's coming from here. It's not quite early enough, so I need to go earlier in the day and see if I can get it to come around more. And actually that's gone the wrong way. Sorry, that's better. So now it's coming around. Oh, no, it's going too far. So in winter, it's going to be difficult to get the angle that I want. So I'm going to change it to later in the year. So I'll go for September, spring. And then here we are. So when I click apply, you can see now that I'm getting the sun from behind the camera at 8 in the morning. Okay, so that's a simple render I can set up, and I'll just then go to click on the teapot. And then the scheme I'm going to set to interior sun only. Click render. Should render pretty quickly on draft. Right, the computers have been going really slow today for some reason. But there we are, so that's working. Okay, now it's very bright in the areas that get direct sunlight. So there you can use adjust exposure, and this is fairly standard. You usually need to use that. So adjust exposure, just like you do with a real camera. And then you've got the slider up the top there. It's very sensitive, so just drag it slightly, then click apply, and you'll see the effect. Again, just dragging it slightly, apply, and there we are. So with that bright sunlight coming over the desk, I mean, it's obvious that we've got natural lighting there, but maybe that's not the most effective. So, yeah, too bright, that's right, exactly. So I know that with this design, the whole idea is that we'll get light through these slats. So I'm going to try some different sun angles. This is a brilliant thing with Revit. So I'll change it to maybe back to winter, where I know I'll get some nice shallow sun angles. And then, yeah, let's try the morning. So then it's going to come through here. And again, we can just experiment then with the time. So trying to bring it around. That's better. So I'm getting it now coming through the slats from the room that's over to the right. And with any luck, I can get it to come through nicely, yeah, all the way through the apartment. So I'll try that now. So go back to render again. And you watch, it'll be too dark, most likely, or definitely be darker than it was before. Maybe showing you how you need to use exposure to correct that. So again, you can see a bit too dark. It's not because the sun's any less bright, it's because of the angle of the sunlight. So in those situations, you need to use the exposure to adjust it. In real life, your eyes would change to let more or less light in. And that's what you do when you're adjusting your camera. So there we are. Okay, so that's a basic setup for rendering with natural light or sunlight, which is a really important thing. And you can get some really good renders. If I come across to the bedroom, and I'll show you a good trick there, I want to keep this view. So I'll rename this, and I'll call this apartment study.
So every time you rename, it makes a copy? No.
No, not yet. So, but I'm going to copy it now. So I'll duplicate this view, and I'll rename it. I'll call it apartment bedroom. And then I'm going to use the navigation wheel and just pan that across, because I know I've got the bedroom next to it. Now it is there, but I'm looking at a wall, so I can use the walk tool and just walk forward a little bit, and there's my bedroom. Now I'm just going to deliberately make it do something wrong, so you can see this is something that most people will have. So I'm just going to come forward slightly, tiny more. There we are. Okay, so I can see the bedroom, and the lighting looks interesting. But if I go to render that now, what I'm hoping will happen is it'll be black, just so that you can see a problem that most people have. Yes, done. Perfect.
Too much lighting?
No. So what it is, it's actually the camera position. So even though I can see the room, I know, because I've done this many times, that the camera is actually inside a wall. So with your Revit views, you'll sometimes see through the edge of the wall, but when you render, it won't let you do that. So I've opened up my plan view, and now I'm going to right-click on the camera view and choose Show Camera. So you can see there, that's where the camera is. Even though Revit's letting us see it in the view, it is slightly inside the wall. So I can just drag it here, so it's just to the one side of the wall.
So you did right-click, Show Camera.
Yeah. Now I can open that view up again, and when I render, I know I'm going to see something. Okay, but again, the lighting environment is different, so the exposure would need to be different. So again here, we can just go to Adjust Exposure and make it darker. Yeah, the sky's automatic. Yep. Okay, you can see already, even though you can adjust things like the highlights to make them not so overpowering, so I can, make those less bright and then make the whole thing maybe a bit brighter. The sunlight can be a bit extreme, so it's also good to have artificial light renders. And so, sorry?
Like to show night mode and...
That's right, it is mostly for night time, yeah. But the lighting design is an important thing in your designs, which you often want to show. So for some designs more than others, lighting is a really important thing. So to put lights in, to put artificial light particularly, you usually will need a ceiling, because most artificial lights tend to be on ceilings. So we're going to go over the ceiling tool and also the view setup that you might need to work on your ceilings. So I've opened up my level 1 ceiling plan, and now I'm going to go to the ceiling tool, and then you can see, because this space is fairly well defined, I can actually just click there to make this shape that you can see with that reddy pink sort of border coming up. Yeah, coral, that's a good, yeah, that is the colour. Yeah. So that would work, but you can see it's picking up also these internal walls, which I don't want. So instead of using that method, this is automatic ceiling, I'm going to click Sketch Ceiling. And then it's just like making a floor. So you've got all the options here for making a floor, also for making a sketch, just like you do with a floor. So we've got the line tool there. You can also use pick walls if you want to, or I'm just going to keep it simple and use the rectangle option there. So I'm going to draw then over the space that I want. I'm going to make one big ceiling that goes over that entire space, and that's fine. Then I'm going to set the height, and remember it's the height from level 1. Now, you probably would be more familiar with this than me. Do you remember what the heights on that level are? So I'm going to guess and say maybe 3,000 to start with. Can always adjust it. probably higher than that. But I'll show you how you can adjust it. Yeah, I think it is, yeah. So I'll just make it 3,000 and then we can adjust it. So I'll finish that ceiling now. And then to see that, at the moment if I've deselected it, it's quite difficult to see. But then to see it, I can easily go to a section view. So I've got one here, I'll double click on the arrowhead, and then I can see it clearly. So there's my ceiling. So after I've selected it in the section, I can always go to the properties and then type in a new height. So I think 3,900 was probably right. Well, actually, no, that's too high. So that's going over this other floor. Yeah, so I'll try 38, yeah. And that's perfect. Okay, so the ceiling that I've made is probably thicker than what you'll get by default. So I've selected it just so I can show you here. If I go to edit type, you can see it's 135. And if we edit there next to structure, you can see how I've set the thickness for those elements to get that total thickness. And so that way it makes a solid block with the floor above. And so then...
So if you have selected those doors as well, like the cold shape, what would have happened?
Oh, it just would have been a more complicated shape. So instead of being a rectangle, it would have been a rectangle with those shapes cut out on the inside, which would just made it hard to work with. Okay, so I've made my ceiling. It's there. So now I'm going to place some lights using place a component. And then load family. And then I'll go to the lighting folder, architectural, internal. They've got most of the basic light types there. So downlight spot is a pretty good directional light. Downlight recessed can is like a recessed, so is it downlight recessed can? Recessed dichroic or LED, there's a few different options now, but again that's basically a recessed downlight. And then you've got these other ceiling mounted lights. And so the pendants as well, they're generally ceiling lights. The sconces are mostly wall lights, so I'm not going to use those. Actually, maybe I'll try one of these. So recessed lamp round LED, that's what I haven't used before, so let's try that. Okay, so here actually we've got some good options. So 75mm trimless downlight I'll use. Yeah.
This is from the Revit library.
Yeah. And yeah, so here, if it's not working, just make sure you choose the place on face option instead of place on vertical face. Not all lights will ask you for that, but obviously this one does. So I'm going to just place a couple of lights into the study space. And then maybe I'll put some behind that screen. And then I'll press escape a couple of times, and you'll see if I select the lights, just held down control to select them both, then click copy, and you can easily copy them with the same pattern. Just again selecting these with control, and you can use the arrows to nudge like you do with anything else in Revit. And maybe we'll bring these across a bit more. And so I want to see the desk to maybe fine-tune the position of these lights. So I just want to look at the view properties there a little bit, and you can see it's, again, a ceiling plan, obviously, because I've got it open in the project browser, and now in properties I can see it's telling me it's a ceiling plan there. So I'm going to go down to, firstly, the underlay section. You can see it's got that first option for the range. I'm going to set that to the same level, to level 1. And notice how now it shows me the furniture from that plan, which is really useful. And I can copy these lights. Undo. And so I might just copy, oops. Let's do it this way. I'll just copy those for bedroom. And then just one more. Okay, so in no time I've got the lights basically filling that apartment, and so now I'll go back to the study view, I suppose. And so then now to render the artificial lights, best tip I can give you there is not to use sun artificial until you've got the others working. So sun only, obviously like I just showed you, that works for natural, also for sunlight or natural light. Artificial only obviously works for artificial light. And when you combine them, sometimes the artificial light won't come up very clearly because the sunlight is extremely bright compared to man-made lights, and so sometimes they're just not noticeable at all when the sun's on. Okay, so it looks very dark. That's not because the lights aren't bright enough. It's because, again, the exposure needs to be adjusted, just like with the sunlight. So again, adjust exposure, and I'm going to take this to the left to make it brighter, and you can see that's going to brighten the whole thing up. So you can go all the way down to 2 if you have to. I don't have to go that far. That's maybe even a bit too bright. Now it's very warm, right? And so that can be adjusted here using the white point option. Just going to take that to the left to make it cooler. Oops, that's too far. So you can see it's reducing that orange tint that it had. There we are, that's much better. Maybe too much, just a fraction. Okay, so so again, if you have the view set up, those settings are going to be saved. So that apartment study has that render setup saved. If I go to the apartment bedroom and then go to render, it's going to keep that interior sun only setting and the exposure that I set before as well. Okay, so again, like I was saying before, as you start to develop your designs up, then you realise that you'll be making changes constantly. And the whole point of this is that you can set those renders up, make your changes, and then come back and re-render without having to do all of that work again. Whereas if you're one of those people who thinks, oh, I'll just leave this until the end because Photoshop seems easier to me and makes more sense to me, it's actually going to take you far too long to get your work done because you can't render that detail in 3D repeatedly. You might get away with doing it once or twice when you first do your initial design, but then as your design changes, if you've got to keep doing that every time you've got to do a presentation, you'll spend weeks to do every presentation board. When really you want to get all of this 3D content rendered quickly using these methods and then enhance those renders using Photoshop. So it's important that you have those views set up. Even if your designs aren't complete, you can start setting your rendered views up with the lighting, starting with natural lighting and then moving on to artificial lighting. And then again, as your design's updated, you can just then keep progressively re-rendering and updating the renders, and then have that workflow set up into Photoshop so that your layers are ready to go to bring in the changed renders with all of the overlays and things you've added with Photoshop. So that should be the process, and so hopefully that's something that you're working towards. And again, so as you now hopefully are starting to get familiar with these tools for lighting and rendering, then you can set up the models, even if you're again not ready to do your ceiling just yet. You can at least think about the spaces that you're creating with your walls so that they can easily enclose a ceiling. And also maybe then once you do have your ceilings, have a look at the different lights that you have. I've shown you a few now. So this light is one that I didn't show you earlier, but it's in the new version in Revit 2018. They added this new LED light, which is really good. And then, do you remember the other lighting folder that I showed you earlier that you can easily access off the P drive? Yeah. So make sure you realise there that there are 2 folders full of lights. If you haven't looked there already, this is what I showed you last time. That, again, when you go to load a light family, this is the default library, which is what I've just been showing you, and it has, again, pretty good selection of lights. But the one on the P drive, I'll just go to now, has both a lighting folder and lighting fixtures. And there are lots of really good lights in both of those. So I've been focusing on ceiling lights, but remember there are wall lights, of course. Maybe I'll quickly show you a couple of wall lights, because we haven't looked at those yet.
If we have like a very unique pendant light,
Yeah.
so do you suggest us to try on Photoshop?
Depends how unique. Okay, so if it's, say, a chandelier or something like that, yeah. So probably the best thing is to put just a basic pendant light in. So there are pendant lights that are basically globes or cylinders, so just a basic shape, and then render with that, and that's going to render the same way a chandelier or anything would anyway. And then in Photoshop, overlay the chandelier on top of that light sphere that you've gotten from Revit, but you'll still get all the beautiful lighting into your space, which would be, that's what you don't want to be doing in Photoshop. But yeah, definitely overlay, the photo of the chandelier, because if you try and put that in 3D in Revit, it's too much. Okay, so I've got a basic sconce here. I'll just put a couple of these in so you can see how easy they are. And actually there's something interesting there. This one has gone inside the wall. Why is that happening? I'm just going to go to wireframe and see there what's happening. Okay, so this is interesting as well. Notice that it's greyed out. That's because I'm in a ceiling plan. So I'm going to go to my floor plan, and then it's not visible there either. So it's a good chance to look at one last thing that I did want to go through, and that's the view range. So I showed you that before with ceiling plans. So remember, you can set the view to look up high enough to see your ceiling, which in this project you won't need to do as much as in others because of the way the levels are set up. But it's still important that you know about that. So view range, remember, you can use to set the height of a ceiling plan. You can also use it, of course, in a floor plan. And here I'm going to change the cut plane. So the reason I can't see my ceiling, sorry, I can't see my light, is because the light's higher than 1200. So remember, a floor plan or a ceiling plan is just a horizontal section. And so it's cutting through your floor, also your walls, at a certain height above that floor. In this case, it's 1200. The light's higher than that, so I'm going to make this, let's say, 1800. Apply, still not high enough, so I'll try and make it 2200. Oops. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if given the height of the space, it still doesn't show. Like if I made the floor to ceiling 3900,
Yeah.
my light should be at below 3900, right? Like that.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't use it to show lights on a ceiling because it'll always be looking down in a floor plan. So that's a different thing. In a ceiling plan, yeah, we're looking up. So here though, notice how now I can see this light and we can select it. And now, yeah, it's a shame. Just because of the way this light's set up, it's going to the wrong place in that wall. So I might delete it. It's actually picking up the wrong wall, I think. And I'll just get another one. So I'll go to the old library and then get one that I know should work a bit better. So we'll get one of the wall sconce here. Yeah, flat round. That should do. And it's doing it again. Oh no, here we go. Now it's working. Okay, I don't know why the other one was misbehaving, but anyhow, so you can see this light now. And so there, this one actually is better because it has a property for the height. So the elevation there, 1900. So I'll make that 1500, just for the example. And so I'll go back to my view range. Right, so do you think 2200 will be a good height for a cut plane normally? 2200? Yeah, exactly, far too high. So I'm going to bring that cut plane back down now. So yes, I'll start with say 1800, and then we can at least see the doors are being cut. And then I can still see the light because we know that's, again, 1500.
What's the average height for cut plane?
1200.
Yeah.
So I'll go back to, well, between 12 and 15. So I'll go back again to view range, and I'll take it down to, let's say, 1300. And, oh, this is interesting. It's just clipping the light. So when it gets the edge of it, it will show it. But I'll bring the light up a bit higher, and then it should disappear. Oops. Let's go to hidden line. Oh, no, it's still getting it. And sometimes it's nice and gives it to you. I actually don't want it here. So I'll go back and see if I can bring this a bit lower. So let's try 1200. Let's try to make it a bit higher. So it might have something else. I'm just going to look at this family. I think it's got a thing in plan. Yeah, it does. Okay, so these here are lines that will show regardless. Yeah, so this one has that special setup, which is handy because you often will need to see it in plan. But if it was pure 3D, then it wouldn't show. Yeah, I just wanted you to see a wall light. I don't think you've seen those yet. So it's behind this cabinet, unfortunately. So you just have to go and find it. So again, I'll duplicate the view so that I keep the old camera position, and then can go for a bit of a walk. And if you haven't tried this, using the walk tool there, you can go for a wander through your space.
So are you just scrolling your mouse or?
Yeah, so it's good to practice with that walk tool. So with the steering wheel, if you just hold the cursor down on walk, and then you'll see the little disc at the bottom. So when you move forward, it obviously walks forward. It's very sensitive though, so don't go too far. And obviously the closer you are to it, the slower it'll go. So you can see they're walking through, and you can go, and navigate through everything if you're comfortable with it. Yep. So back to here, and there's my wall light.
And what does the center do? Center clicking?
Oh, yeah, that's a bit of a funny one. It centers it on the pivot point, but you've got to choose where that is. I don't use that one very often. That's probably the one I use the least. Okay, but then very quickly I'll just check to make sure that's rendering. So again, it's picked up the settings that I had before for the interior view, for the one that had the artificial light. Okay, you can see it's actually giving fairly realistic lighting there. And then I'll go back to the original study and just show you what would happen if I change it to sun and artificial. That's where people usually get stuck, because again, sunlight is far, far brighter than any man-made light source, except for lighthouses and things like that can have some very bright lights, but even those aren't as bright as the sun. So in other words, the sun is going to overpower all of these lights. So if I go to sun and artificial, this one actually might be okay because we've got a lot of indirect sunlight. But no, even here you can see, even though the light's coming through these slats, it's just blowing those lights out of the water completely. Okay, so it's barely noticeable that I have artificial lights, even though we know they're working. So you will see that people do some pretty nice renders if you look online at some of the really good examples. That people do pretty good renders with both natural and artificial light. What those people are doing is cheating and bumping up the artificial lights hugely, and I've done this myself. Usually got to make the artificial lights about 10 times brighter than they are in real life to get that effect, so that they look the way you think they are in your mind. You think that when you take a photo or when you look at something that has the artificial lights turned on during the day, you think that they're doing something. But have a good look. If you look at the buildings over there, those lights are on. I guarantee you in those rooms the lights are on usually, but you won't notice from the outside because the sunlight is so much brighter. When you're in those rooms, your eyes naturally contract and so there's less light in and the lights appear brighter. And you notice this effect if you go from an indoor space to an outdoor space that's very bright, your eyes obviously take a while to adjust, and that's the same effect. So watch out for sun and artificial. You can get it to work, but it's a bit harder than the others. Artificial only though usually gives you more control anyway. Okay, but again now, because I've changed the scheme, so what do I need to do? Exactly, just the exposure again. That's it, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so it gives you time to work on those things, and that's what you're going to be working towards, getting rendered views from Revit that you can then work on with Laura. So unless you've got any questions about that, I'll finish there. It's all good? Yeah, great.